Welcome everyone who's joining via the recordings. This will be a short one because we've spent a lot of time talking about the showcases and logistics and so on that you would be very bored by. So the first issue you're going to talk about is issue 191 about modeling color. And I will share my screen because looking at a black image in the video is very dull. So the issue that we've discussed on the last couple of calls has been how to model colors and whether they should be dimensions when we know very specifically what the color is, or as types when we just know that it was tagged as being white or green. So there's been some discussion in the call, which I didn't put into the issue, but I can quickly find. I suggested that we could do both together, being that we could have a dimension for color, which if you don't have an absolute value for, then you simply don't list the value. And instead you would have, or as well, you would have P2 has type or classified as a classification of that dimension to say that we think of this color, say it's if C is close enough to white, and hence we could tag that dimension as being white, classified as being white. Then if we only know it's white, we wouldn't have the value, and we just have the classification. If we know both, then we can have both. If we only have the value, then you wouldn't classify it. So it seems like this would be a single pattern that would allow all of the permutations. Slightly more complicated for the simple case when all you know is white, but not dramatically so. So that's I guess that's the proposal, and the example is, and Jason was in the call notes for the last call. Is that something that we can get behind? And if it doesn't work in practice, we can always change it. But to close this issue and move on, is that acceptable to folks?
Rob, this is Charlie. I have one question about this.
Yep, of course.
So in terms of use cases, both of the two use cases that are mostly covered by this issue are the one you're pulling colors from an image so you have the exact pixel values, and the other you're probably pulling it from a cataloging, right? And generating AEP white or whatever. Is there a use case where you need to have the reference lighting that produce that digital color? I'm thinking of conservation, but I don't know if that's actually something that is a need there. Because if you're recording the color, the only way that you can really know what color it quote unquote actually is, right, would be to have some kind of color temperature reference for the source.
Yeah.
But so in the conservation case, I can imagine that that's something that you would need, but I don't know if that's actually a need that exists in the real world.
Yeah. Well, conservation is the real world. However, I would think that is an issue for the Narcissus group rather than for us directly, and hence these sort of overlaps between the two discussions. That I think you sent me for that in the notes. So if we come up with something that doesn't work for the conservation use case, then that's a problem. On the other hand, I don't think we need to solve the conservation use case in our scope. So the answer is a definite maybe, because clearly, if you take a photograph of an object in red light then it's not going to look anything like it would in natural light. And even natural light has some tones. So yeah, the exact details are probably beyond our scope, but we shouldn't prevent those details from being recorded if known.
Definitely works for me.
Yeah.
Can I just offer a quick opinion?
Please.
Yeah. So I think if you take it to the conservation case, you would probably need a more elaborate setup to not only describe the actual dimension, but to describe how it was produced, what machines were used, what were the settings, and so on. So that indeed, I think, falls out of the scope. The only question for using dimension here is whether you would want to do any sort of clever searching or reasoning around, say, the hue of a color, and whether the type of the color is in agreement with the actual hue that the color has. I'm just saying that I think that just using the type as a color would probably be enough. But if you were hoping to do a little bit more advanced searching and relate that type with an actual measurement, you would need that extra bit of structure to define the dimension. So it's thinking whether reason around the exact measurements for color as opposed to just looking at categories.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then we would use something like attribute assignment or measurement to relate to have the activity of measuring the color.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that takes it a little bit further.
Yeah, and the same is true of all dimensions. Right? You could have the instrument, probably a ruler, used to measuring the height and width and depth of the thing. But if it was a building, you probably aren't using a ruler. You're maybe using some laser to do the measurement, or model lights for larger areas, or whatever. So yeah, I think this is the boundary between description and recording the activities that led to the description. There's times when we do need to record those describing activities, and certainly for conservation and very precise sort of scientific side of things, we do need to.
But I'm just thinking, if somebody wanted to do a search to bring up all the items that have a specific versions of a color, it would be easier to do that as a dimension than do it categorically.
Yes,
perhaps. Yeah.
Yep. Definitely. Any other questions or thoughts on this one?
I have a quick question. This is John at the Frick. Has anyone used the program called TensorFlow? I was at a conference 2 weeks ago, and they mentioned that this is something that is used to look at a color and then give it a specific number. But I haven't been able to investigate it yet, and I wondered if anyone else had.
Yeah, we have not. Yeah, TensorFlow is Google's cloud-based thing, isn't it? If I recall correctly.
Yeah, it's an AI library, I think, that allows you to train a model and then get some expected results.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe we could take that one offline. For people who have used TensorFlow, please do get in touch with John, because yes, that sort of work is very useful for generating data. In the last 5 minutes, I would like to at least look at the proposed pattern for relationships, because it will almost certainly be necessary for the Georgia O'Keeffe Showcase work. So this is issue 107, and the background is, we have CRM with a good sort of low-level ontology. For classes, we can use classified as to AAT concepts or similar to say that this human-made object is a painting and this human-made object is a sculpture. However, we don't have that capacity at the moment for properties or for relationships to say that there is a student of relationship between these two people, or the spouse of relationship between Georgia O'Keeffe and Stieglitz, who are two of the folks that we've been talking about quite a lot. So rather than having many little, probably not interoperable relationships between individuals, the idea is to have a class which describes the relationship in a less thoroughly modeled way. So in the issue I commented a day ago with some JSON, so for example, we could have a class, call it relationship, which is then classified as some relationship type. And in this case, the relationship type would be student of. It would go from some entity to some other entity. So in this case, ULAN student person has a relationship to ULAN teacher person, and that relationship is then classified as this notion vocab.edu roles 1102, which is student of. So that sort of gives us that same escape route out to more specific relationships, using the same sort of pattern as we have for other classes. AAT itself doesn't have these relationships, so there is every opportunity to not just use a Getty vocabulary here. And it also would give us the opportunity to talk about the time extent or the spatial extent of that relationship. So it's when was Stieglitz the spouse of O'Keeffe, for example, which you wouldn't be able to do if you just had a single relationship between the two that can't itself have properties that clarify where and when. This would also give us a pattern for the .1 properties in CRM, potentially. So we could use classified as to a CRM relationship, and then have a type of, an additional property on the relationship to manage .1s if we don't already have a pattern.
Rob,
Go ahead.
let me just chime in and say that's very interesting. I think that's going to really come in handy to address specific problems I've been having with exhibition modeling, the use of the class and the class type. Specifically, say the variety of ways curators, designers, everything are related, and the terminology that ends up being used historically. So this is, I think, going to be directly applicable to solving that issue.
Great. Marilena, do you want to talk about the publishing role pattern?
Yeah, sure. Well, in my case, of course, I had the same problem with the data at the Zero Foundation, and I ended up using this pattern that you can see, which is based on, I don't know if you ever heard about the ontology design patterns. That is a wiki thing, let's say, of patterns that can be reused. Basically, they are snapshots of the Dolce ontology. So we have high-level ontology as well that can help. And in this case, the pro ontology is mainly reused in the publishing domain. So you will see, if you go through the example in the page, you will see that, like roles can be held by agents and can be related to either other people or documents or organizations, but actually can be used also in a broader sense, like with places and so on. And it's quite efficient, I might say. I also use the underlying patterns for describing other types of phenomena, for example, like names in time and space. And I don't want to suggest exactly this one because, of course, it's very domain related. But I think this is the kind of pattern that could work. Mm-hmm. And you can see there is TVC that is mentioned in the image is the underlying pattern. Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's not prescriptive, I would say, but I think it's the most efficient one. Like I managed to describe almost everything with that. Mm-hmm. So maybe worth a try.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, could you try to represent the sort of student of relationship using that pattern and put it into the issue so that we can look at the so we can compare the two?
Definitely, I will do that later.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I quickly endorse that? I've only quickly looked at that pattern when it was on the screen, but it looks good to me. But what I want to put a cautionary note in: having time intervals be properties of or connected to relations themselves is a bad idea. One wants to have another category of thing, which is the relationship holding for the time interval and have it related to those two things separately, which is what this pattern seems to do. So yeah, this looks good.
Any other last thoughts on this one? And if you have not read up on this one, please do so that we can talk about it next week or next call or the call after.
Is there also other than in the GitHub, does the Linked Art site have documentation or walkthrough this issue?
No, it doesn't. So this one came up and we didn't really, because because there's different patterns and whatever pattern we decide to use, it's not going to be directly in CRM. We wanted to sort of leave this one as open as possible for as long as possible to see if some other pattern did emerge that might make the decision about this one easier. So yeah, this one has been sort of long outstanding as a known issue that we've been hunting on until now because we need it. We need it for the showcase.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you to Liz for joining. And please, if you would like to continue to come back every couple of weeks, you would be more than welcome.
Thanks. Great to hear everyone.
And yeah, we'll have a call in another couple of weeks. Thanks to John for taking the notes. And yeah, I will send around links to repositories and issues later today. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Bye. Thank you.